The cinematic landscape of the late 1930s was dominated by an industry obsessed with scale, spectacle, and the desperate search for the next massive financial triumph. When MGM initiated the development of The Wizard of Oz, they were not merely looking to produce a children's film. They were attempting to bottle lightning in a way that would rival the unprecedented cultural and economic success of Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This pursuit of perfection pushed the studio to its absolute limits, transforming what should have been a whimsical fairy tale into a high-stakes, industrial battlefield where the boundaries between professional ambition and human exploitation began to blur with alarming speed. To understand the darker legacy of this film, one must first recognize the sheer tension that existed within the studio walls before a single frame of the final version was captured. Executives were caught in a paralyzing dilemma. They wanted to create a product that felt like a warm, inviting family adventure, yet they were concurrently influenced by the gothic and sometimes genuinely unsettling imagery found in the original L. Frank Baum source material. This internal conflict resulted in a chaotic production environment where directors were replaced, artistic visions were scrapped, and the psychological state of the cast was secondary to the rigid requirements of the Technicolor camera. Early attempts to define the visual identity of Dorothy Gale offer a perfect window into the studio's struggle for control. Initially, the production team under director Richard Thorpe pushed for a highly stylized, glamorous aesthetic for Judy Garland, dressing her in heavy makeup and blonde wigs that rendered her unrecognizable as a humble farm girl from Kansas. This was a classic hallmark of the era's vanity-driven studio system, where the actress was treated as a mannequin to be molded. It was only when creative interventions occurred, most notably by George Cukor, that the production pivoted toward the more grounded, naturalistic look that eventually made the character resonate with millions of viewers. However, as the visual style of Dorothy was simplified, the world of Oz was being built with an intensity that bordered on the surreal and the grotesque. Designers were tasked with creating a reality that looked otherworldly, and in their attempt to shock audiences, they experimented with creature designs and facial prosthetics that were objectively disturbing. Many of these early character concepts were discarded not because they lacked artistry, but because they carried a sinister, nightmarish quality that threatened to alienate the very family demographic that MGM desperately needed to capture to recoup their staggering investment of nearly $3 million. The physical reality of the sound stages at the time was a primary contributor to the cursed reputation that would later plague the production's history. Technicolor, while visually breathtaking, was an incredibly demanding medium that required intense high-output arc lights to penetrate the film's stock. These lights generated an oppressive furnace-like heat that regularly pushed temperatures on the stage well above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. For actors wearing heavy, restrictive costumes made of materials like wool, felt, and layers of rubber, this was not merely uncomfortable, it was a health crisis waiting to happen as they attempted to perform under relentless, blinding glare. The strain placed on the young Judy Garland during this period is a profound indictment of the old Hollywood studio system's disregard for the well-being of its performers. At only 16 years old, Garland was subjected to a rigorous and psychologically damaging regime designed to maintain her appearance and energy levels for the cameras. By controlling her diet with extreme precision and supplementing her long working hours with various stimulants and sedatives, the studio essentially treated her as a product to be optimized. This environment fostered a cycle of dependency that would follow the star long after the film's release, leaving an indelible mark on her life. Beyond the systemic mistreatment of its lead actress, the production was marked by a series of physical hazards that modern safety standards would categorize as criminal negligence. The most famous of these instances involved the initial casting of Buddy Ebsen as the Tin Man. The decision to use actual aluminum dust for his makeup was a catastrophic oversight. When the particles were inhaled over several days of filming, they caused a severe reaction that landed the actor in an iron lung. This moment serves as a haunting reminder of how little the studio prioritized the biological safety of its workforce over the aesthetic goals of the production. Even after Ebsen was replaced by Jack Haley, the challenges associated with the Tin Man character remained physically punishing. The switch to a silver paste did not mitigate the risk of infection or irritation, as the makeup had to be applied and removed with harsh chemicals that compromised the skin's integrity. Every day of shooting became a grueling process of transformation and recovery for the actors involved, with little to no acknowledgement from the producers regarding the lasting physical damage that such extreme measures were causing. It is a testament to the actors' dedication that they were able to deliver such iconic performances while in literal physical pain. Ray Balger, cast as the Scarecrow, faced his own unique version of daily torture throughout the filming process. His mask, fashioned from rubber to fit his face seamlessly, functioned as a seal that prevented his skin from breathing. During the intense heat of the studio, this caused severe skin distress, and the process of peeling the mask away each evening left his face deeply scarred and irritated. These physical tolls were not just isolated incidents. They were part of a broader, systemic pattern where the actors were expected to endure whatever was necessary to achieve the desired visual effect. The most visceral example of the dangers inherent in this film's production was the terrifying accident involving Margaret Hamilton, who played the Wicked Witch of the West. When a trapdoor sequence malfunctioned during a scene involving pyrotechnics, Hamilton suffered degree burns on her hands and face. The scene is often discussed through the lens of horror, but it is fundamentally a story about workplace safety. The fact that the makeup itself was toxic, forcing crew members to rush to remove it before it could interact with her open wounds, highlights the nightmare conditions the cast were forced to navigate for the sake of entertainment. Even the set dressing was not immune to the reckless nature of the production's design. The snow that blankets Dorothy and her companions in the iconic Poppy Field sequence was composed of industrial-grade asbestos. While today we understand the fatal consequences of asbestos exposure, at the time, it was the standard choice for realistic, fire-resistant winter effects. The actors were encouraged to play in this material for hours, unknowingly inhaling fibers that would carry long-term health risks. This detail serves as a chilling symbol of how the studio prioritized the look of the film over the literal lives of those on the set. The treatment of the performers playing the Munchkins provides yet another layer of exploitation that has been re-examined by modern audiences. While these actors were the backbone of the film's magical second act, they were treated by the studio as a sideshow novelty rather than as professional contributing artists. The disparity in pay between these human performers and the dog playing Toto is a widely cited fact that illustrates the systemic dehumanization present in the industry at the time. Their experiences, often minimized or turned into urban legends, reflect a broader pattern of disrespect toward marginalized groups in 1930s cinema. As the production moved toward completion, the studio's anxiety about the film's tone became increasingly apparent. The removal of sequences such as the jitterbug is often attributed to packing issues, but in the context of the entire production's history, it represents a wider effort by MGM to curate the Oz brand. By excising the more chaotic or bizarre elements, the executives were attempting to force a cohesive, family-friendly narrative onto a film that was being built by people who were, in many ways, operating on a different, much darker wavelength. This editing process essentially sanitized the film's original, more psychologically intense intent. The psychological dimension of Dorothy herself was another area where the studio sought to exert control. In early interpretations of the story, there was a greater emphasis on the idea that Oz might be a manifestation of Dorothy's internal trauma or emotional distress. While this idea was not fully realized in the final cut, it provided a framework for Judy Garland's performance. By playing the character with a sense of genuine, weary sadness rather than simple-minded joy, she introduced a depth that elevated the film beyond a mere fantasy, even as the studio fought to keep that depth from becoming too prominent. The tornado sequence itself remains one of the most ingenious yet dangerous feats of practical engineering in the history of cinema. Without the aid of digital effects, the crew was forced to create a physically threatening environment using materials like muslin and wire, which were set in motion by heavy machinery. There was no room for error. A single mechanical failure in the proximity of the actors could have resulted in a serious accident. This atmosphere of constant, impending failure reinforced the idea that the film was being forged in the fires of a high-pressure, potentially uncontrollable environment. It is perhaps ironic that a movie so associated with wonder and color was actually a source of so much misery and technical frustration. The disconnect between what the audience sees on screen, the technicolor vibrancy, the smiles, the catchy musical numbers, and the reality of the set, the heat, the chemicals, the fear, is exactly what has fueled the curse narrative for decades. This dissonance creates a unique haunting effect for the modern viewer. Every time we watch the film, we are essentially witnessing a performance that was achieved under conditions that would be considered unethical by any modern standard of labor and safety. The rumors surrounding the production, such as the myth of the hanging munchkin, serve as a fascinating sociological case study. These stories persist not because they are true, but because they align so perfectly with the audience's intuitive sense that something was wrong with the film. When viewers see the background movement and interpret it as something dark, they are reacting to the underlying, pervasive tension that permeates the entire production. These urban legends are, in a sense, the public's way of acknowledging the film's hidden, darker history without fully realizing they are uncovering a literal, not supernatural, truth. Even the financial reality of the film at the time of its release contradicts the modern myth that it was an instant, universally acclaimed success. The movie struggled to find its footing against the gargantuan popularity of Gone with the Wind and failed to turn an immediate profit for MGM. The critical reception was equally polarized, with some prominent reviewers dismissing it as a failed experiment. This lack of initial triumph makes the later, multi-generational obsession with the film all the more intriguing. It suggests that the movie had to wait for the audience's cultural context to shift before it could truly become a classic. When we look back at the film's evolution, it is clear that its meaning has changed dramatically as our collective perspective on labor and mental health has evolved. What was once seen as a whimsical journey is now understood as a story about a young girl trapped in a system that does not understand her, forced to navigate a landscape that is as terrifying as it is beautiful. This evolution in interpretation is not just a reflection of societal change. It is a testament to the enduring, raw power of the core story, which manages to shine through despite the toxicity of its origin. Ultimately, the production of The Wizard of Oz remains a foundational text in the study of Hollywood's golden age. It is a masterclass in the tension between creative genius and industrial exploitation. To watch it today is to engage with two films simultaneously, the one the studio intended for us to see and the one that was actually lived by the people who made it. This dual experience is exactly why the film remains so fascinating to analyze, as it continues to hold up a mirror to our own changing understanding of what we are willing to sacrifice for the sake of art. When we examine the enduring cultural dominance of this film, we are essentially looking at a case study in how mass media can successfully bury the truth beneath layers of nostalgia. The public's relationship with the film has become so deeply intertwined with childhood memory that suggesting the production was a site of trauma feels, to many, like a personal attack. Yet, the facts remain an inseparable part of the film's history. By documenting the systemic exploitation that characterized the era, we are not destroying the legacy of the art. We are finally providing a necessary, honest context for the human effort that made it possible. The transition of the film from a commercial disappointment in 1939 to an omnipresent cultural institution by the 1960s is perhaps the most significant aspect of its biography. Television changed everything, as the movie entered the domestic sphere, becoming a recurring part of the family ritual. This shift effectively domesticated the film, stripping away the harsh realities of its production and presenting it as a safe, wholesome package. It was during these decades that the behind-the-scenes stories began to lose their edge, replaced by sanitized anecdotes that preserved the studio's carefully crafted image of the golden age. However, as the truth about the studio system's cruelty toward performers like Judy Garland became more widely known, the public's perspective began to shift once more. Today we view her performance not merely as an act of acting, but as a testament to her resilience. Knowing the daily pressures she faced, the forced diets, the pill regimens, and the total lack of privacy, makes her portrayal of Dorothy's longing for somewhere over the rainbow feel infinitely more authentic and heartbreaking. Her internal reality leaked into the performance in a way that no director could have scripted. The debate over whether the film is cursed is really a reflection of our collective discomfort with the ethics of early Hollywood. We use the word curse because it provides a supernatural explanation for what is actually a very human industrial horror story. It is easier to believe in bad luck than it is to confront the fact that an entire studio system was built on the calculated destruction of young people. By mythologizing the accidents and the injuries, we distance ourselves from the uncomfortable truth that these events were the logical outcome of a system that prioritized profit over people. Looking back at the costume disasters, from the lead-based green paint to the aluminum dust, we see a clear pattern of negligence that defined the era. The makeup artists were under extreme pressure to achieve a visual standard that was, at the time, physically impossible to maintain without causing harm. When we see the Tin Man or the Scarecrow on screen, we are seeing the literal physical sacrifice of the actors. This perspective shifts the film from a light-hearted musical to a high-stakes survival narrative, where the characters' endurance on screen mirrors the actors' endurance behind the camera. The story of the Wicked Witch's stunt double, Betty Danko, whose life was permanently altered by a pyrotechnic failure, is another chapter in this dark history that has been largely sidelined. It highlights that the dangers were not limited to the stars of the film, they extended to every worker on the set. The lack of accountability for these injuries is a hallmark of the period. It underscores that the studio, with its immense power and legal departments, was effectively untouchable, leaving the injured to deal with the physical and mental consequences long after the cameras stopped rolling. The use of asbestos in the poppy field scene is perhaps the most chilling reminder of the era's profound ignorance regarding workplace health. At the time, the material was marketed as a miracle of modern industrial efficiency. Its ability to mimic snow without being a fire hazard made it the perfect tool for the studio. The tragic irony, of course, is that the very substance chosen for its safety properties was one of the most deadly materials in the world. It serves as a haunting metaphor for the entire production, a pursuit of visual perfection that held hidden, fatal consequences. We must also reconsider the role of the Munchkins, not as comedy relief, but as performers who were subjected to significant indignities. The disparity in their treatment compared to the rest of the cast is a striking example of the hierarchies that existed within the studio system. They were treated as a monolithic group, stripped of their individuality, and underpaid for work that was physically and mentally demanding. Analyzing their experience helps us see the film as a product of a society that was deeply unequal, both on and off the set. As we continue to deconstruct the film, the deleted scenes and early drafts offer a glimpse into the version of Oz that might have been. The darker, more psychological tone that executives feared would frighten audiences is exactly the tone that modern filmmakers have since embraced. This suggests that the studio's instincts to soften the film were perhaps a miscalculation of their audience's capacity for complexity. We now live in an era where we can appreciate the dark, the strange, and the unsettling, which makes the loss of these early scenes even more significant. The psychological impact of the film on the audiences of 1939 is also worth considering. While the studio wanted to compete with the cheerfulness of animation, they inadvertently created a visual experience that was genuinely jarring for many viewers. The colors, the strange creatures, and the intense, high-energy performances were unlike anything else in the cinema at the time. The criticism that the film was bizarre was not just a rejection of its quality. It was a response to the raw, unpolished intensity that had not yet been fully suppressed by the studio's editorial hand. The enduring popularity of the dark side of the rainbow theory is an important part of the film's modern cultural life. While it is certainly a coincidence of timing and editing, the fact that it exists at all speaks to the audience's need to find a darker, more cynical layer to the story. We are not satisfied with the straightforward version of the film anymore. We want to see the cracks in the facade. We want to explore the psychological depth that we know exists beneath the bright, colorful surface of Oz. When we analyze the film as a documentary of its own production, we realize that the magic of Oz is not just in the special effects. It is in the endurance of the cast and crew who worked through conditions that would have shuttered any modern production. Their performances are a defiance of the studio's restrictive control. Every smile in the film carries the weight of the reality behind it, which is precisely why it remains so compelling to watch and re-examine today. The transition of the Dorothy character from a starlet look to the natural, grounded version we know is a crucial moment in cinema history. George Cukor's decision to simplify her appearance was the only thing that kept the film's emotional center from dissolving entirely. By choosing to present her as a vulnerable, authentic teenager rather than a studio-polished doll, he allowed the audience to connect with her. This connection is the reason the film survived its own chaotic, toxic, and dangerous production cycle. It is interesting to note how the film has been reclaimed by modern audiences. We no longer see it as just a piece of entertainment for children. We see it as a story about the search for self-worth in a world that is often hostile and unpredictable. This is a testament to the fact that the film's core themes, the longing for home, the search for courage, the desire for heart, are universal. They resonate regardless of how much we learn about the troubled, often cruel process of their creation. The comparison with other films of the era, such as Gone with the Wind, highlights just how much of a risk the studio took with this production. The fact that they survived the financial and critical disappointment of the initial release is a testament to the film's inherent quality. It proves that a great story, even one forged in such an industrial, problematic way, can transcend the circumstances of its birth and achieve a level of cultural permanence that few films ever reach. We should also reflect on the role of the director, Victor Fleming, who stepped in to navigate the final stages of the production. He inherited a project that was already in disarray, with a cast that was exhausted and a studio that was panicked. His ability to pull the disparate threads of the story together and deliver a coherent film is a feat of professional management. Yet, even under his direction, the underlying tensions of the set continued to shape the final product in ways that he likely could not have predicted. The Hanging Munchkin myth and other urban legends are not just rumors. They are the audience's way of processing the fact that the film is haunted by its history. Whether or not those legends are true is beside the point. They represent the viewer's instinctual reaction to the film's deep, underlying, and often invisible darkness. It is an acknowledgement that the reality behind the film is much more complex and perhaps more tragic than the screen reveals. When we look back at the 1939 production, we see a snapshot of a moment when the industry was at its most powerful and its most unprincipled. The lessons we learn from this history are important not just for film buffs, but for anyone interested in the ethics of the workplace. The studio system's disregard for human life and safety is a reminder of why we need the regulations and standards that have been fought for in the decades since. It is a cautionary tale about the cost of progress. Despite all the controversy, the injuries, and the systemic mistreatment of its cast, the film continues to exert a powerful universal appeal. This is the ultimate paradox of The Wizard of Oz. It is a story that was born from chaos and built on human sacrifice, yet it manages to touch the lives of millions. It is a work that belongs to the audience now, and our ongoing analysis of its history is simply a way of ensuring that the true cost of that magic is never forgot. Ultimately, the study of this production is a journey of discovery. By looking beyond the bright colors and the familiar songs, we find a story that is more nuanced, more tragic, and more human than the one the studio tried to sell us. It is a reminder that even the most perfect works of art are often the result of imperfect, sometimes painful, and always human processes. The film lives on not in spite of its history, but because it contains the echoes of everything the people who made it had to endure.